Hi, everybody. Please keep eating your lunch while we talk. I'm Morgan Davis. I'm president of the club. I'm really pleased to welcome you guys today to our conversation. We've got a couple of very excellent speakers who I will let introduce themselves and talk a little bit about why they're here and why they are experts on today's subject. But I wanted to say, since we're in this nice little room, we can keep this pretty conversational. I quite like having these talks in the veranda because it allows you guys to participate more. So there are microphones that can go around. So if you have a question that you want to jump in with, please feel free to put your hand up so we can get you a mic. But I think that's better than us waiting and saving the very end to do Q&A. So let's keep this conversational today. So with that, I will let you guys introduce yourself. Mark, do you want to go first?
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Mark Waddington. I'm the Chief Executive of Hope and Homes for Children. For my sins, I have been for 13 years, which actually makes me a newbie. I've got colleagues who are 30 years into the organization. Prior to Hope and Homes for Children, I was the Chief Executive of War Child, and prior to that, working in West Africa with youth movements and so on.
Great, thank you.
Afternoon. My name is Adam Thacker. I work with the Cambodian Children's Fund. I'm the development director here for Hong Kong and Singapore. I am the newbie. I've only been doing this for a couple of years, so I won't call myself an expert, but I represent some very deep expertise within the organization.
Well, the nice thing about today's conversation is you guys are coming from overlapping areas, but also very different areas. So we're going to be able to talk today about some different aspects in caring for ageless vulnerable children, and how the different things that you've learned come into play and what we can do with that information. Mark, do you want to start with explaining a little bit about what Hope and Homes for Children is?
Yeah, so Hope and Homes for Children works on childcare reform and connects it into a broader systems approach that impacts on protection systems, health systems, education systems, and so on. We have developed a practice base over the 32 years that we've been in existence across 3 regions now. So Eastern Europe, where we've had to adapt very recently to the Ukraine crisis, obviously, within East and Southern Africa, and then in the last 9 years in Nepal and India as well. And essentially what our entry point is closing orphanages. Closing orphanages is a result of systems change. It requires us to have prevention services in place that prevent children from being separated from their families in the first place. But not all families are perfect, but we don't want to punish the child by placing them in an institution, and therefore developing services and systems that deliver alternative forms of family care, and then taking that to scale. So if you look at where we are in Romania, when we started just after the fall of Ceausescu, there were just over 100,000 children in the system. You'll remember them tied to radiators, buzz haircuts, and all the rest of it. Appalling situation. So we've managed to help bring that 100,000 children down in the system to 640. So we're almost there. Bulgaria, similar situation. We have literally 2 institutions left to close. Rwanda, 173 children left in the system. And this includes children with disabilities, profound disabilities, getting them into loving, caring, protective families, so that they have hope, their well-being improves, they have the opportunity to do things they would never have otherwise had. I was just saying to Adam, one of the challenges we face, because it sounds great and simple and what have you, it's not, it's obviously complex human stuff, is how do we take quality to scale? When you're looking at impact, how do you deliver quality at scale? And therefore holding local authorities to account is absolutely critical in the whole system.
Great. I want to come back to a lot of that because there's, of course, a lot of follow-up questions to have about how this works. But first, Adam, can you introduce your organization a little bit? I think you said earlier Cambodia Children's Fund may be a bit of a misnomer. So who are you working with?
So I would say that we look at a lot of the things that Mark's organization does, but on the micro scale. So CCF started with a very simple proposition, which was to try and get children off the rubbish dump or the former rubbish dump in Stungmanche and into school. And that started in 2004. And over the years, in order to try and overcome the challenges, what has happened is we have created an entire community and a community model that functions at almost every level. So it's education, it's health, it's protection, it's villages, it's feeding programs, and they all interconnect. So I think it's quite interesting that we are implementing at the micro level what you're doing at the macro level.
So the word orphanage, I think for most of us at this stage, has kind of a negative connotation. I think that it's something that, of course, we've seen a lot in the West. The U.S. has gotten rid of most traditional orphanages in place of foster care, but we are still seeing them, of course, around the world. So where do traditional orphanages still function, and are they ever good?
So let me caveat that straight away with the fact that one of the first things that Hope and Homes for Children ever did was to build an orphanage. Okay? So our founder established the organization on the back of what was happening in Bosnia and the devastation in Sarajevo. The children in the main orphanage in the city had been abandoned, so he resigned his commission in the British Army and raised the money to build this orphanage. And he did something that remains really important to us as an organization. When he went back to visit the children, he sat down and he listened to them. And what they said to him is, we don't want to live in an orphanage. We want to live at home with the family and so on. And that listening to children, ensuring we're platforming their voices, because children are the experts on their own childhood, right? That has remained with the organization ever since over the years. Is there such thing as a good orphanage? Having said all of that, no, there isn't. The science around that is conclusive. All the outcomes demonstrate that orphanages elevate the risk around health, negative health outcomes, negative education and development outcomes, protection outcomes in particular, a lot of hazards associated with orphanages, and that the process itself of institutionalization can have lifelong effects on a child. The Bucharest Early Intervention Project, which has undertaken research in China, Russia, as well as Romania, found that regardless of location and regardless of how the system is run, for every 3 years that a child under 3 stays in an orphanage, they lose 1 month of physical growth. There are 5.5 million children around the world confined in institutions, and the vast majority of them have their biological parents alive, and nearly all of them have broader extended family. So the opportunity to reintegrate children with their birth families and extended families and complement that with foster services and so on is a far more effective way of rearing children. And by the way, it's more cost effective as well, because what happens is you're reducing the impact that the child, as they grow out of care, would have otherwise had on society. Children who age out of orphanages are more likely to come into conflict with the law. They're more likely to have health problems. They're more likely to be unemployed. Their children are more likely to go into care, and so on and so on. By placing them in properly supported, and that's really important, properly supported forms of family care, you're addressing a broader burden on society as well as improving the lives of children themselves.
So let's take it a step back then. You mentioned how a lot of these children do have living family. Why isn't family not involved in the first place? What is happening that makes them have to go into the system?
There are hundreds and hundreds of reasons. Let me give you one. There was a boy that I met in Rwanda. This is quite a long time ago now, so we're talking around about 2014, 2015. His name is Joseph. He was born with cerebral palsy. Disability carries a huge stigma in Rwanda, and his parents abandoned him. Now, that needs putting into context as well. Rearing a child with cerebral palsy is expensive, and if you are not earning enough money, it can completely destroy the household and the family. So there are lots of interlocking factors involved in that. He was left with at a convent in Kigali, and although they treated him as well as they could, with kindness and what have you, he was left, they didn't know how to treat him properly, he was left primarily just looking at the ceiling, and that was his only stimulation, except when he was being fed. Well, we managed to find him a foster family. These weren't his relations, but a foster family. And Grace, the mother, she had previously had specialist physiotherapy training as a nurse. We refreshed that training, worked with the family, just did some minor amendments, a very traditional dwelling, skimming the floor with concrete so it can be kept clean because he was going to spend a lot of time on the floor. Within 6 weeks, and I met him after 6 weeks of being transitioned out, he'd gone from laying on his back for the whole of his 8 years to being able to sit up unassisted. And he was the most mischievous little bugger that you've ever met in your life. As soon as Grace turned her back on him, he was bum shuffling out the back just to get a look at the view. You know, you've got mountains and everything in Rwanda. And she took him down to be registered with the local health protection registrar. And the guy said to him, not unkindly, he said to her, "Why have you taken this child in? Because he's going to be a burden on your family for the rest of your life." And she said, "Well, he's not a burden, he's a blessing." So he rubbed out the name Joseph and put blessing in there, and that's how he is called in the community now. That's his nickname. So that illuminates the motivations, you know, whether it's a birth family or a foster family.
And Adam, when you're dealing with the children that are in this area of Cambodia, do a lot of them have family available? How's that situation?
They do. So the issue that we try and, the focus of our organization is education. And the issues that we come across all the time is we get the kids into school. And it's interesting, your origin story, ours is quite similar. So Scott originally created a residential care program. And in 2014, we had 1,200 kids in the system. And then I think that was probably coincided with when all of the research started coming out around the impact of orphanages. So over the following, I think, 8 years, we've scaled it back, and we now have 0 kids in residential care. And the impact has been fantastic. So I was sharing with you earlier, we had, 2 years ago, we had 50 children take the year 12 exams. All 50 passed, all 50 are in university. Last year, we had 97 kids take the year 12 exams, 96 passed, about 84 are in university. We've got to the point now that whenever the government of Cambodia has to deal with an orphanage situation and wants to set up a fostering program, they call us in. We've become a benchmark for the Cambodian government to give them advice for local fostering programs wherever in the country. And in our particular community, they call us in and they bring us in. I would echo what you're saying is the challenges are myriad. Obviously, a lot of it centers around poverty. So what we try and do all the time is create the support structure to enable the families to focus on caring for their children. For the disabled and special needs kids, many years ago, we were not capable of handling it, so we worked with a government center. And I was just hearing this morning from our COO that at the time we put 5 children in, we lost them, so we then decided to do it ourselves. So now it's all one-on-one fostering, and again, yeah, we're seeing similar results. The community living model is without doubt superior, even though it's probably a lot harder work at the beginning, but the results are incredible.
So you both have seen success with this, but how easy is it to find foster families that are ready to take in these children, especially if you say they have some sort of disability?
Difficult. So one of the issues, again, quite similar. So you mentioned your founder listened to the children. So Scott, who founded CCF, he's been living in Cambodia for 21 years. And still to this day, he walks the community every single day. So we as a group are not allowed to book an appointment for him between 4:30 and 7 p.m. every day, 7 days a week, because he's out with the community. And I was having lunch not too long ago with one of our supporters here in Hong Kong, and I was telling him this story. We had Scott there, because Scott's quite humble, and I sort of say, that, something you need to understand about Scott is this is what he does. And this gentleman turned around and said, how long did it take you to be trusted by the community? Because he understood that the white man wandering around the poorest community in Cambodia, how long did it take to generate that trust? And Scott said, about 10 years. And I almost fell off my chair, because that's 10 years of Scott walking through the community every single day. So I'd say the biggest component is trust. Our community trusts us, so when we need to find a foster family for a child, they are ready to work with us, they're open to working with us. And it's difficult, but we're finding that whenever there's a need, we're able to find a community member to step up and provide that care for the children.
I think to build on that, Adam, one of the things that we've learned from our data, trust is absolutely critical, is also accountability. So some of the training that we do with local social workers, for example, when we're transitioning children out of institutions and into family, we track metrics once the child, at the point at which the child is transitioned, and then on 6 monthly cycles. And they run across various domains, from cognition, linguistic ability, well-being, motor skills, et cetera, et cetera. In almost all cases, what we see is an inverted hockey stick, in which you get this, in the first 6 months, this incredible improvement from round about, depending on the age cohort, 55, 60% of where they should be with those different domains for their age. And then hitting after 6 through to 18 months, round about 98, 99%. And by the way, that's the good news. We can do something about this. This is why we don't talk about children being damaged. It's the harm that is done to children that can then be reversed with the right services. However, in South Africa, we had a challenge when the social workers, the local authority social workers, went out, and the metrics we were getting back on those points of reassessment were indicating that after transition from the institution, they were getting worse, which was a clear concern for everybody. And we went down, spoke to the social workers, spoke to the families, listened to the children. And what had happened was, instead of following the protocol, which was the social worker should have visited the family to do the reassessment at home, they actually booked a taxi and got the child in the taxi and took them back to the institution, scared the shit out of them, which is why the metrics all went down in the way that they did. And therefore, holding local authorities to account, holding the social workforce to account systemically is, I think, the second part of that creates that accountability and trust loop that is needed. To the foster care issue then, 3 things. When systemically, we need to be able to identify and recruit the right families, number 1. Number 2, we need to be offering training that is dynamic. It needs to change with the changing context. And number 3, it needs constant monitoring the systems around that. And that monitoring must center the child.
So that leads me to another question I wanted to ask about finding the foster families. How do you ensure that these people are motivated for the right reasons? Does the government get involved in this system to check boxes in any sort of way? What are you looking for in a good foster?
Family assessments. So you've got all the scorecards and what have you, but also the training of your own social workers that are actually filtering and screening those families. We've got social workers that have been working with us, as I said earlier on, for almost 3 decades. And they've got huge amounts of experience in doing this kind of thing. And, retrospectively looking at the data, where and when have the breakdown rates increased, for example. You've got to be able to monitor that and be able to understand what were the drivers of that breakdown. Normally, our breakdown rates are less than 1%, but you can see trends occasionally moving, particularly during COVID. Breakdown rates spiked, including when you have food security issues, very often climate-related as well. So you've got to monitor those moments particularly well and change the service provision at the time. But getting the right family is the critical. It's an obvious thing to say, but it's the critical thing.
I guess for us it's a little bit different because we're operating in the one community, which is our community. We work with the government Because any time that this happens, we ensure that all the documentation is in place and the government understands what we're doing. To the point, as I said earlier, that the government utilizes us as their benchmarks. So what we're also finding is that when we do it within our own community, the government kind of leaves us alone to keep doing what we're doing because the results are really so good. And to your point about the accountability, absolutely. I guess I didn't mention that because that's all within our own community, so we're tracking everything for ourselves. But you know, we service about 4,500 people on a daily basis, but our community, if you include family members, is about 8,500 people, and the wider community around the former rubbish dump in Stungmanche is about 15,000 people. So we have a strong community on which to draw when we do need the foster families, and we know them extremely well. So we've been there for over 20 years. We're there, out there amongst them every single day. So we're able to vet them on a continuous basis.
So, Mark, you mentioned about how a lot of these children do have living family members around. When do you get them involved? At what point is that an option for some of these kids?
Well, it's the family tracing side of things. Excuse me. So ensuring, and the problem with that is in many cases record keeping is very poor. So sometimes you don't even know who the family members are, and therefore family tracing can be a very involved process. By and large, we do manage to trace the families because even if the child isn't transitioned back to their biological family, if you can create some kind of healthy relationship with their family, that works particularly well for the child, even if they are in some form of foster care or kinship care, so that it's not a complete cut-off from the family. That's not the case 100%, but by and large, we try and make that happen where relevant. So family tracing is really important. And then again, going through the whole needs assessment side of things. Sometimes you have very predatorial systems. So you've got, orphanage economies in which orphanages are set up to generate funds from tourists. We've seen a lot of that in Thailand. We've seen a lot of that in Uganda, Kenya, and so on. I mean, when you look at the economy associated with those setups in a place like Uganda, estimates have put $250 million US coming into the Ugandan orphanage economy from voluntourism, faith-based groups around the world. In fact, the UK is a finance supplier to orphanage economies. £500 million leaves the UK church every year, community, and is sent to orphanages around the world. So it's really important that we're working with those families to understand what are the motives and reasons why the child was separated in the first place. Sometimes it can be under really spurious circumstances, not the family's fault. And then working on a plan with those families to address that. And by the way, that sounds as though it's quite time-bound, and you will know this really well, Adam. It's not. Some of these families will need support for the rest of their lives. You don't just walk away from them. It's like, social services are there for families in need for the whole of the duration that they need them. You can't throw a time-bound 8-month project at it and go, bang, right, you're all sorted, you've graduated from the system, you're on your own. And that's why setting up the broader systems reform side of things is so important in a sustainable way.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, it's really important to remember that in these communities there are really, really difficult issues at play. So, addiction, substance addiction, gambling, domestic violence, extreme poverty. So in many of the cases, we put the children into foster care up and until the families can look after them themselves. So we try and give the families all the support we can, the therapies that they can. Where both parents have to go away and work in a factory, for example, we will make sure that as soon as we can, we reunite the family when they can. We'll put them into housing projects. So we've built over 650 homes around our community. This is the one thing that Scott always reminds me is just remember the difference of the reality of these communities that they're dealing with on a daily basis that we have the luxury all too often of not having to deal with when we grew up. And that's something that I think is really important to remember.
So then, looking at that, it sounds like both of you guys are looking at these children long term, because I think that's something that comes up a lot with kids in the foster care system is, okay, they've aged out, now what? You turn 18, okay, good luck. So what do your organizations do to look long term for these children?
For us, supported independent living. So it's developing and designing those services with young people. As I said previously, they're the experts on their own childhood. They're the experts on their own youth. So that independent living as they transition out of care, as they come to 18, up to 24. In certain circumstances, we've gone up to 26, where young people have needed that additional support. Because when these young people come out of care, very often they don't have the networks, they don't have the agency. If they've been institutionalized, then they have challenges with attachment that they need support with, which make them incredibly vulnerable to protection risks and so on. So there's a whole re-gearing, reorganization of that young person's life that they have to lead, but with the right support around them and grounding them in the community. And for children with disabilities in particular, they face a lot of stigma. So working with the communities into which they're transitioned is really important. And that, I mean, in Rwanda, we're seeing it can take 3 to 5 years to get to a point where a community is able to gear what it can do for a child or a young person with disability because initially of the barrier of stigma. So it takes time. It's literally not a stick in plaster thing that you can put in place. You need the systems, always you need the systems and services. But yeah, so that independent living support is critical.
We were talking about this earlier. Our aspirations definitely go beyond 18, which is very interesting. So yes, when a child graduates from our secondary school, they're effectively out of CCF. But for those who want to go on to university, and we're tracking almost 80% of our students are going on to university, we offer them a deal, which is that we will continue supporting them through university, provided they do at least 300 hours of community service in their final 3 years at school. So we have this incredibly strong leadership program. And really our stated aim is that we hope and we believe we're creating the leaders of tomorrow. So we're aspiring for our community members to not just be independent individuals, but to actually actively participate in their community in the future and bring themselves out. And I'm very happy to share that we have, Pauline and I have many colleagues at CCF who came through our system, went to university and now working with us. And we have many individuals who are now in very gainful employment, and each year goes by, we're getting more. And to the point when I first met Scott a couple of years ago, after speaking to him for about an hour, I turned around to him and I said, if I may, I don't think you've even begun to see the impacts that you've created. So I think it's the next 20 years that you will actually understand what you've achieved by seeing cohort after cohort graduating and going into the workplace. Obviously, not everybody does that. So we work with partners who specialize in vocational opportunities. With the special needs kids, the disabled kids, well, we are the community, so they stay within our community. And we've created this system that you're talking about, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you, and I'd love to get your thoughts and seeing what we've done and how we do it. But those who need the support, they stay within our community. Those who are ready to flap their wings and off they go, they're doing that. We have 12 students now who are at Melbourne University under a scholarship program that we've got with Melbourne. We've got one at the University of Oklahoma doing a degree in civil engineering. One has just started Beloit College in Wisconsin, another one starting next year. And we have one young man who is doing a PhD in applied engineering and machine learning in Belgium. And all of these kids grew up on the rubbish dump. It's quite remarkable.
Well, I think you're starting to anticipate another question I had, which is about the kids that can't do independent living, that aren't going to be able to proceed in this way because of disabilities or maybe some other issues, and it could be more difficult for them. And I think we see in other places that there are, I guess, adult institutions that work to support these people when they are older. how does that work? Is that something that you guys look at as well? I mean, if the institutionalization isn't working for the young kids, is that something that makes sense to transition them into when they're older?
Yeah, and it's very, very context driven. So, obviously Rwanda is different to Ukraine. Nepal's different to Bulgaria. One of the models that we are working on in Rwanda is, and in South Africa, builds on an active family support platform in which you're creating care plans and anticipating care plans 5-10 years out for children that are vulnerable to going into some form of adult institutional confinement because of disability, let's say. And ensuring that you're mobilizing the right agencies within government and local authorities, the right NGOs in civil society and what have you. So we work very closely with the National Agency for People with Disabilities in Rwanda, specifically on that kind of thing. And again, it's holding the toes of the local authorities and the national government to the fire to ensure that they are accountable for the well-being and protection of these children as they age out and into adult services. We don't provide those adult services, but we work with other organizations to support them in the transition and the design of them, and ensure that the young people are at the heart of being consulted in the design of those. Because you can't, the problem with orphanages and institutions is they're a one-size-fits-all solution, which don't fit all children's needs. Of course they don't, and they're harmful. So it's important that we develop a complex or a variety, diversity of services so they can be wrapped around the individual needs of young people.
I can keep asking questions. I have plenty, but I want to make sure that we're not missing any questions that are out here as well. So just throw up a hand if you have any questions, and we can get the mic around. Yes, right here. Mic coming up behind you.
Hello, I'm Tohan Chi, a freelance journalist. My question, I think, is mainly for Adam. I mean, well, is there a risk or fear of children being kidnapped and exploited for trafficking into underage prostitution work in Southeast Asia, like Cambodia and Vietnam?
I think there's a risk of that everywhere. I don't think it's exclusive to Cambodia, but absolutely. So 12 years ago, the Cambodian Children's Fund set up a sister organization called the Child Protection Unit. And it's been set up with a former Australian policeman called Jim McCabe and Scott. It's entirely funded by us. And what we do is we work with the Cambodian National Police to help them investigate and prosecute crimes against children. So we've been bringing modern investigative techniques, modern forensic techniques. And over the last 12 years, this has developed into a national program. And earlier this year, about 2 months ago, we had the official opening of what we call the Lotus Center, which is a dedicated 50,000 square foot building that brings in all the components of this side of our work under one roof. So we have a full medical team. Up until now, I mean, it's incredible to think about, but if something happens to a child in the provinces, they have to wait 24 hours, sometimes 48 hours to even be examined. And quite often, they're not being examined by a specialist. Now they can call us. We will send our own ambulance. They will be brought to Phnom Penh. They will be seen by our fully trained medical team. We have a team of 12 Khmer women liaison officers who are also specially trained in child trauma. We have a couple of suites where the families can stay. We have without question, the most advanced forensic laboratory in the country. So we can do all of that side of the work. We have a full investigative team. We have desks, liaison desks for Ministry of Justice, the police, Ministry of Interior, and then we have a large training facility so we can do capacity building. In the last 12 years, we have helped the police investigate and prosecute, I think, 1,000 cases, maybe more, with an 84% conviction rate. So it's working. And really, I guess what started this was this idea that in the very poor communities, when something happens, nothing happens. But that narrative has shifted. Now there is a clear understanding that if you do something, particularly in our community, but in other communities around Cambodia, you're not going to get away with it anymore.
Yes, another question in the back.
Hi. Thank you very much for all the work you're doing. It's great. I'm Claire, and I represent an organization that raises funds for grassroots charities in Asia to keep teenage girls at school. So echo all you're doing in terms of keeping them at home and out of an orphanage or an institution. My question is maybe broader, just generally would like to hear a bit more from you, your learnings of the years of consistent fundraising. The challenge of making sure you've got funds to keep the great work you're doing going, and that it's consistently delivered with so much competition for money in these areas now. I'd just like to hear a bit more from you about what you've learned over the years in terms of fundraising.
You've got to be scrappy as a butcher's dog. Adam said it earlier on, actually, and it's a mantra we use: don't leave money on the table either. So let me just put it into context, because fundraising has always been difficult. It's never not been difficult by its very nature. You're asking people to give you money, and they don't get anything material in return, by and large. I have fundraising colleagues who are saying they've never known it as difficult as it is now, and there are lots of reasons I'm sure everybody around this table is aware of. I mean, the evisceration of USAID, the defunding of ODA around the world and so on has intensified competition while taking money out of the system. All that said, there is more money than there has ever been in the history of humanity, and a lot of it is in private wealth. And we are seeing the largest transference of private wealth intergenerationally than has ever happened in history. So, as I said to my crew, there's more money out there, we just need different keys to the safe. And so we've got to be innovative, we've got to be flexible and adaptable, we've got to be capable of identifying new markets, new kinds of prospects, and so on. But at the heart of it, there are some still standard things. You've got to be able to tell an evidence-based, deeply human story, right? You've got to be transparent and trustworthy, and so you need all the auditing apparatus around you. You've got to be able to prove impact in different ways, and it's not always numbers. It's very much around quality, and that's one of the challenges that we're constantly looking into. How do you scale quality? And you've got to position yourself, because here's the other thing, as a chief executive, what I don't want to be doing is competing directly with an organization like yours, Adam, because we're fighting over the same scraps, and it's not a zero-sum game. How do we fundraise in a way that while we do it, it creates the conditions for you to fundraise well, or while you do it, it creates the conditions for us to fundraise well. And therefore, talking to each other is really important in this. I work quite closely with a lot of other chief execs, trying to find ways in either which we can put a coalition bid together, a collective bid, or find ways in which if we talk to one group of people or run a campaign, it creates a halo effect that benefits other organizations and vice versa. And that's really important because, in the scheme of things, we're quite small organization. I think we're about the same size. We turn over around about 12 million a year, give or take, which in the scheme of things is quite small. There's so much money out there that we shouldn't be competing. And I think that's really important.
I think to add to that, be smart and sophisticated, understand how the world has changed. So most of us will remember Live Aid and how that radically changed the landscape, but the messaging then was pretty grim. Your organization has the word hope in its name, which I think is incredibly important. It's to provide people with inspiration rather than guilt. The results are incredibly important. I always tell people that what I think we're doing fundamentally is we're demonstrating that equality of opportunity is real and that it works. And I find that's a really wonderful message, because then that means it applies not just to us, but it applies to everybody. It applies to what Hope and Homes is doing. It applies to what most organizations are doing. And if we can keep reiterating that simple message and that it's a positive thing that everybody's doing, then yeah, I agree with you. There's never been more cash available than today. We just got to find the right pockets.
Anybody else in the audience? Well, going back to some of my questions for you, because I can keep going. I'm curious, when we talk about foster care, a lot of times the stories that get attention are when kids get adopted. Those tend to be touted as kind of success stories. But in reality, is that a goal of your organizations? Is adoption something that you're aiming for at any point?
Certainly from our side, the goal is ensuring children are growing up in loving, protective families. And families come in all shapes and sizes, all shapes and sizes. So there's no one definition of what a family is, as long as the carers in the family create a loving, stable, and safe environment for a child to grow up in. Then I think adoption is not an objective, it is an option, and occasionally a result. And I'm not saying adoption is a bad thing when I say this, because it isn't. There are some incredibly successful and incredible adoptive parents. The challenge with adoption is by its very nature, it is a legal arrangement with the state in which the state relinquishes its responsibility to the child to another family, and therefore the birth family lose the parental rights that they have. And that should never be done lightly. So adoption requires a really strong system around it for it to function effectively. And that's not saying I'm against adoption, or we are. We run services that lead to adoption, absolutely we do. But it just takes care and time and attention, because the permanency that comes with it is very difficult to unravel, and there are consequences for the child. So obviously it shouldn't be entered into lightly.
Yeah, I saw the question and I had a chat with our COO because I am still new to CCF, so I was curious what our official position is. And he told me that we looked at it in the past, but it is a very complicated area to deal with. So for now, we don't proactively pursue it. I echo what Mark has been saying, and I'll give you an example. One of the villages we've created is 52 homes, and it's for women only. We call it the Girls to Grannies Village. So we have this wonderful granny program in CCF. And to give you some understanding behind it, we all know the history of Cambodia. We understand that there's this generational trauma. And so what CCF understood was that there's a big hole with regards to the transfer of cultural knowledge, heritage, traditions. So we proactively encourage the elderly to join our community. So we have this wonderful Grannies and Grandpa program. And in our Girls to Grannies Village, we have a few households that are older girls living together. So they are their own family together. So they're surrounded by a protected community. So they have the grannies there, they have the other parents there, we're there all the time. But in the absence of finding them an adoptive family, we enable them to become their own family and thrive within our community. But it's very different, because for us, we really are the community. So we're able to provide all those services and support structure that allows that to be successful. But yes, I think we definitely feel that families can come in all shapes and sizes, and we're demonstrating that successes can come from anywhere.
Yes, we have a question in the back.
Thanks for your time today. Question for Mark. When you're choosing, when you're choosing a region to enter to Children Assist, what sort of considerations do you look for? Is it governmental support? Is it what when you say, okay, this is the region that we're going to focus on, as opposed to another region? What goes into that process?
It's changed over time. You can imagine when we were first established, everything was driven by opportunity. We've learned a lot since then, and we're far more strategic. So there are a number of things, and it will depend on what is in front of us. But one of them is definitely being able to demonstrate proof of concept in a different context. which is why we began one of the reasons we began working in Nepal and India in 2016. Another is the opportunity to build networks in regions in the way that we are trying to do here across South Asia and East Asia. We have what we call BICON that is going to be run. It's a biannual conference that brings civil society, governments, and young people together in a safe space to share practice, to share insights, and so on. That's happening in Malaysia next month. And building those networks in a way that we create, or we contribute, don't create it, we contribute to a rising tide that lifts all boats regionally, and that's important. We have worked very closely with the British government, actually, because it was a passion project of is a passion project of the previous Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, who adopted his own youngest daughter. His mum went through the care system and so on. So he really gets this. And we've worked with him on creating a global charter that's going to be announced next week at the UN General Assembly. And so it's using things like that as a litmus test, which countries are signing up to those kinds of things and showing the kind of interest that would indicate to us there's political will. Because you need that political will in place in order to kick doors in and light fires and really drive change. I would say that there's one other thing as well. We're not seduced by the scale of the problem. And let me explain that. On the one hand, you could go to a country where there are large numbers, like Romania, like Ukraine, of children in the system and say, right, the need is greatest there, let's go there. You could go to another country like Eswatini, next to South Africa, where there's only 200 children in the system, and go, you can complete a full systems reform there in the middle of South Africa geographically and use that to ripple out to a much larger country. So I'm not saying that we avoid countries like Ukraine, obviously we don't, but it's not the only criteria. So there's lots of different things that we're bringing into play. Sometimes we'll be approached by a government. So for example, we were approached by the government of Eswatini. We've been approached by civil society in Madagascar and so on. And that might lead us to undertaking an assessment and what have you. But one of the key things is that long-term commitment. Because childcare reform, I mean, you know this, it's a decade's commitment. It's not a 1 or 2 year thing. It's not a time-bound project.
And building off of that, you're clearly looking at a lot of different places. There's a lot of different cultural aspects that are going on into that. Who has spare rooms in their home? What kind of families are willing to do this? How do you master that in all of these different places?
How do we master that? Well, I mean, the key is working with families and creating services that engage directly with families. Every family is different. They have different housing needs. They have different transport needs. We've seen children placed in orphanages because their family couldn't get the child to school. You know, so it's, you've got all these different needs, and every single family is different. So it's going back to the point I made earlier. You need a diversity of services locally that can wrap themselves around a family's and child's need, and it will be different again in different countries. So you've got to work at all levels vertically, you know, with literally community and village level authorities, leaders, provincial authorities, et cetera, national government, in order to build those systems and the architecture that ensures you've got that diversity at the business end of the stick.
I think we have time for one more question. Does anyone else have one, or I can wrap us up? I'll end on a slightly tough one for us. You mentioned volunteerism earlier. That's clearly still ongoing in a lot of places. We're sitting up here as 3 Westerners who are not native to this region. How do we avoid the white saviorism complex? What is our role in all of this?
We've certainly got kind of 3 ways of doing that, and there are more, obviously, but all our staff in country, any country we work in, we're currently working in 10, they are all nationals. So that's number 1. Secondly, we don't recruit expats to work in country. Sachin runs our work in India, for example. And I think it's absolutely critically important that our media certainly doesn't focus on my face. I mean, you can see my face. It's like a slapped arse. The last thing you want is my face on a bloody website. But that we're profiling our social workers, you know, in Rwanda, in Nepal, and our partners. We work through local partners in many countries like India and Nepal, Moldova, and elsewhere. And I think that's important. But the third one, and the one that I think is something that, and we do it well, but we're still learning how to do it, is giving voice to young people and children themselves. This is their story. It's not my story. It's not our story. It's their story. So making sure that they are centered with their voice and that their voice is given a platform. And not only with the media, but also in conversations that count. So we work very closely with British High Commissions and embassies, American embassies and so on, and bring young people into those places and say, look, we need you to lobby the government on these issues, because these are the issues that mean a lot to us as young people. So I think there are ways you can deal with that.
I think I agree with that. You know, we're 450 people in our organization. Over 95% are local Khmer. I would say on the volunteering side, I think we've got to be really careful, because there is a lot of good work that's been done, and I don't think you can discount the awareness that is being driven by people traveling and actually finding out what's going on. So I may look white, but I'm half Japanese. I grew up out here. I've always said to my parents that one of the greatest gifts they've given me is they brought me up, they raised me on both sides of the world. So I grew up out here, I went to school in England, and I've grown up from a very early age, traveling everywhere as well, knowing that things are different and there's no right or wrong. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that especially Westerners have when they come out to this part of the world. I mean, Scott admits that when he moved to Cambodia, he thought he had all the answers. He was a wealthy man, he was running, you know, Sony Pictures International, he was a successful movie executive, he gave it all up, sold everything, he figured he could go there and fix all the problems in Cambodia. And he says for the first 5 years, he basically had to relearn everything he thought he understood. And that was why he walked into the community every day. So I think if you're going to go, you know, we do accept volunteers, but we're very careful. We require a minimum commitment of 6 months. So if you're going to go and volunteer and somebody offers you to for a week or 2 weeks, then maybe question that, right? Because how much of an impact can you actually make? And then who's getting the impact of that particular exercise? So, you know, I think we've got to be very careful not to discourage everyone around the world from trying to do something, but there's got to be a lot of thought, a lot of research, rely on organizations such as Hope and Homes and hopefully ourselves and other organizations out there to try and give you a better sense of what's needed and where it's needed, and really think about it. So we don't, for example, we don't ask people to come and build our new facilities when we want to build facilities, because we give those jobs to local builders, because that's the most important thing we can do. So we'll get people to come and help in the right context, to teach English, to do things where we don't have the local skill set, but where there's a local skill set, we'll always, you know, give that the priority. And I think if we can approach our interactions from that viewpoint, then yes, there's a lot of good that can be done, as long as it's done with the right process.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for being here with us today. Special thank you, of course, again to Adam and Mark. I really appreciate you guys coming in.